Joining us today, retired U.S. Army Colonel John Sweet and Mark Toth, Foreign Affairs Analyst. Welcome to our program.
Hey, Daniel, Sofia, thanks for having us back on the show.
Great to be back. Thank you.
Ukrainian drones this week struck another Russia's oil refinery in the city of Ufa, more than 800 miles away from the Ukrainian border. This is one of Russia's largest oil refinery and one of the biggest supplier of fuel to the Russian armed forces. John, if Vladimir Putin doesn't settle this war, even after those intensified Ukrainian drone attacks on Russia, will he be able to stay in power as long as he wants?
As long as he wants? Probably not. But look, Ukraine's ability to strike deep with their own organic assets, and just 800 miles, add another 700 miles to that distance, and that's what the Tomahawk missile gives Ukraine. So to continue to strike Russia's ability to fund their war by hitting their oil refineries, it's going to be devastating to the Russian economy. Now, in the short term, Russia can borrow money, from China, from North Korea, from India. They can take advances on money, but eventually they got to pay that back. Eventually, the bill payer wants his money. So it's doing a lot of damage to the economy, and it could threaten Putin's ability to stay in power.
Also, we have new estimates. Ukrainian drone strikes have knocked out up to 20% of Russia's gasoline supply, according to President Zelensky. Also, reports suggest Russia has lost as much as up to 38% of Russia's oil refining capacity. From your perspective, don't you think Vladimir Putin is playing with fire right now?
Literally, right? Literally playing with fire. He is. It's a dangerous situation for him. He's vulnerable, and he knows he's vulnerable. His air defense systems are ineffective against Ukrainian drones and Ukrainian missiles. They're going to be exceptionally ineffective against the Tomahawk missile, which can fly low altitude, supersonic speed, and fly evasive routes. So it's their weapon systems, their ability to defend their infrastructure is minimal. He knows that, which is why you're seeing him ratchet up again the escalation rhetoric about nuclear weapons and third world wars and invasions of NATO. That's all designed to get the discussion about the Tomahawk missile to settle. Now, the other thing we need to think about is the ceasefire in the Middle East. Now that affords all those weapons and munitions that were diverted away from Ukraine in October of 2023 can now be diverted back to Ukraine to give them an increased ability for a counteroffensive. They're getting the strategic assets. Now we're talking about the tactical assets, more artillery, more armored personnel carriers, more tanks, more ammunition. So on the twofold, he's afraid of Tomahawk, but he's also afraid of all the other stuff that can come back to Ukraine. So it's going to be very interesting how the next few months play out.
Also, U.S. President Donald Trump says, quote, if Vladimir Putin doesn't settle the war, it won't be good for him. Do you see this as a message from President Trump that Putin could face another external and internal problems inside Russia?
Well, that's exactly the message. The message is, I am considering giving Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. I am going to meet with Zelensky next week, or this week actually, to talk about the transfer of missile systems to Ukraine. It's all messaging. It's all trying to get Putin to understand that this weapon system is decisive. More so than HIMARS was in 2022. This brings the fight deep to within the sanctuary of Russia, where those Tu-95s and MiG-31s were able to launch from impunity, where they're able to store their ballistic missiles, where they're able to build their drone systems. They are now vulnerable. And it puts the emphasis, the onus, if you will, on Putin to consider coming to the negotiation table. But we know after 3.5 years that is not an option. He is going to continue to press forward. He's going to continue to threaten making the war wider in order to achieve his strategic objectives.
Also, according to Financial Times, you just mentioned about Tomahawk cruise missiles. There are really lots of discussions about this topic. According to Financial Times, Ukraine could receive from 20 to 50 US-made Tomahawk cruise missiles. Would this be enough to change the dynamics on the battlefield and conduct another deep strike campaign on Russia for a long haul?
Yeah, so sure, it's another weapon in the tool of weapons that Ukraine has. And what it does, it affords Ukraine the ability to use their own organic weapons against the refineries and other type of strategic, if you will, sites. Now, what it affords Ukraine also is that precision deep strike capability we just talked about. And there's three sets of targets they want to go after. The first are those airfields located deep within Russia that they haven't been able to get to, where those Tu-95 bombers are being launched from, where those ballistic missiles for their permanent sites and their mobile sites can be hit. It also gives them the ability to go after those drone factories, right? There's two drone factories in particular, one at Yalabaga and the other at Tatarstan, that they can strike and destroy. They need to defeat Russia's ability to inflict casualties upon them. And that is via drones and ballistic missiles. And this weapon system gives them that capability. It also gives them that capability to finally take down the Kerch Street Bridge and further isolate Crimea from Russia.
Also, Ukrainian campaign deep inside Russia aimed to bring Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table. According to the New York Times, Ukrainian officials say that if strikes can cause enough damage to Russia, they could ultimately negotiate a trade. For example, Ukraine holds attacks on Russia if Moscow does the same. According to New York Times, Mark, could this lead to some kind of a ceasefire deal like that?
Yeah, it could. And I think we've got to zoom out a little bit here at higher altitude and think about what Trump is doing here and maybe lessons learned that Trump has had in the Mideast. He's realizing now that peace through strength is not enough just as a slogan. And when you look at the attack on Isfahan, on Fordo, and Natanz, and taking out Iran's nuclear capabilities, that changed the dynamics tremendously throughout the Mideast. That caused Hamas to suddenly become widowed, with people trying to get away from them, Turkey saying, we've had enough, Qatar saying, we've had enough, they've become a pariah. I think Trump is saying, look, and he said this in Sharm el-Sheikh just a day ago, basically saying the bombing of Iran changed everything. And I think now he's looking for similar punches in the mouth to Putin to basically say, look, we're going to change everything as well in Ukraine. And so I think it's notable that Zelensky Friday, just 2 days from now or 3 days from now, is headed to Washington to meet. I think that's purposeful messaging. So I think in terms of trying to bring down Putin's capacity to wage war is one thing here, but I think it's a messaging that he's being sent to Putin that, look, I'm going to ratchet this up now. You're going to get your similar, obviously not on your nuclear facilities, but a similar punch in the mouth that I caused to happen in Iran. And we can do that through the Tomahawk missiles, if that's what it takes. There's pressure that he's probably trying to put on Germany to release the Taurus missiles as well, which would give them a shorter range version that's probably more effective at taking out the Kerch Bridge. So I think all of those things are designed. Now, real quickly here, the two things, though, that I would point out is what you don't want is just a cessation of strikes that work to the advantage of Russia. I mean, this still has to have the same end goal that Trump had with Hamas, getting them out of the Gaza Strip. It's got to have an end result here in Ukraine, which is expelling Russians from every inch of sovereign Ukrainian territory. So I hope that that's what this leads to. If it's just up, we won't attack your energy facilities in Russia and they won't attack yours in Ukraine, that just prolongs the war. That just creates a status quo. Ukraine needs something decisive. So hopefully Trump sends that message.
Donald Trump is going to meet with Vladimir Zelensky this week, and we know that Ukrainian leader is going to Washington and the meeting is scheduled for Friday. And just in recent days, two leaders already spoken by phone. Mark, what are your expectations from this meeting? Could we finally get some good news about Tomahawk missiles delivery to Ukraine?
Sofia, I'm hopeful that this is going to be a good meeting, unlike where we were at the beginning of the year in the Oval Office and the falling out, if you will. that happened, especially with J.D. Vance, the vice president, instigating that. It looks like now that Trump is treating Zelensky with the same level of respect that he's been treating Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel. And I think he's realizing now that Zelensky is actually a useful asset to him in terms of taking his case to Putin. And so I do believe that this is all about messaging. Look, this is the first major meeting that Trump is having since the ceasefire agreement that was signed between Egypt, Qatar, and the U.S. and Sharm el-Sheikh and the Sinai and Egypt. And for Zelensky to be coming is like putting a spotlight on him. And that spotlight is meant to send a message to Putin, pay attention to what's happening here because things are going to change. So I do think you could get some kind of major announcement with the Tomahawks, or it could be that Trump still wants to use that to try to leverage his messaging to Putin to say, if you don't do this. I would only point out, though, as General McRyan had pointed out days ago, that, look, the Tomahawk missile doesn't represent any kind of capability on the battlefield that Russia itself hasn't been deploying since day one. Kinzhal missiles, the hypersonic ones as well, all are nuclear capable. So for Russia to be whining about this, I think makes no sense. I hope that on Friday that changes, that Trump pushes back, and that there is some kind of major announcement that has Tomahawks written all over it.
Donald Trump did not win this year the Nobel Peace Prize, but he clearly not given up on the idea to end the Russian war against Ukraine. And some analysts actually say that the delivery of Tomahawks could become a real leverage over Putin. Mark, from your perspective, do you think how far actually could Trump go in order to bring Putin to the negotiation table?
It's going to take a lot. Look, I mean, Russia is not Hamas, okay? It's a superpower. It's nuclear capable. It clearly has, as Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO's warning, intentions of potentially attacking Europe as soon as 5 years from now. They're building that kind of large conventional scale army that need it. Now, that's on the design, but it's not yet implemented. But clearly, Putin is also conducting hybrid warfare throughout Europe, and he's willing to conduct that type of attacks on European institutions and the like, including political influencing, media influencing, and so forth. So from that standpoint, look, Putin is not going to be easily cowed. He's heavily invested in this. I'm not sure he survives this if he can't win in Ukraine, or at least walk away with a PR kind of viewpoint that he has won something in Ukraine. So I don't think Putin is going to go lightly. I don't think it's going to take a lot more. Trump needs to get that, right? He needs his nuclear moment, not a bomb, but I mean, he needs that nuclear bombing moment that he did in Iran, I think, to change that. And it's probably going to take a lot of little things. It's going to take the Tomahawks. It's going to take a no-fly zone in Western Ukraine. It's going to take shoring up the Black Sea area to make sure that the Russians are further curtailed from using that. I mean, he really needs to kind of almost in a pincer-type motion start to box Putin in, taking out the shadow fleet that's giving him oil revenues in the Baltic Sea. It's going to be a lot of the above to basically replicate that one bombing that the B-2 bombers did and taking out the 3 nuclear sites in Iran. So hopefully that's what Trump is thinking. That's what's the game plan. If not, then hopefully he's going to be headed in that direction soon.
Saying this, do you think Trump have enough time basically to move forward with all these decisions, because he's in power already almost for 1 year, and of course it's impossible to end this war during 24 hours?
Yeah, look, the 24 hours was obviously hyperbole from Trump on the campaign trail. I'm not a political analyst, but I get what he was doing. He was trying to pin the war on Biden. It was very unpopular with his base, as well as some isolationists, the MAGA base, the isolationists. So some of that was just posturing. But I do think, I think we do see an emerging new Trump policy here. The lessons learned in the Mideast. We may come in time to view the bombing, those B-2 bombers hitting the 3 installations in Iran as a change, an inflection point, if you will, not just in the Mideast, but in Eastern Europe as well. That Trump has new ideas how to exert U.S. power, how to get end results. Now, obviously, it's going to take a while. But look, we're only 10 months into Trump's presidency at this point, and the world has changed considerably. So, to answer your question, yes, I do think he has time. I'm not saying this as a fan or a detractor of Trump. I'm simply saying, look, you got to look at the facts on the ground. The Mideast has changed remarkably in 10 months. By letting U.S. power get exerted, in this case via Israel, it changed a lot. Yeah, Hezbollah has been neutered. The IRG is effectively out of Syria. Iran is at a tipping point, potentially looking at a revolution with the Shah coming back and taking power. And I think the same kind of things can and should be happening in Eastern Europe. And I think there's time for that. And typically when those dominoes start to fall, they fall faster than you realize. And I think we saw that in the Mideast, and I hope that Putin's dominoes start falling to his collapse as well, sooner as opposed to later in Eastern Europe.
Lately, the Kremlin and Russian propagandists have been saying that using Tomahawk system would require U.S. troops to be directly involved. And from their perception, of course, it's escalation and etc. John, could you please explain us how do you read these claims, and do we really need to involve American troops in order to use these missiles?
Okay, so the involvement of U.S. troops or U.S., if you will, technicians, more along the line, is similar to the Patriot missile system. Okay, it's a very complicated technical system that requires a lot of maintenance. It requires a good deal of intelligence in order to operate the system. So yes, it will require intelligence. It will require technical know-how. I'm confident that over the past couple of months that Ukrainians have been brought into the fold and have been taught the critical aspects of how that weapon system works, how to employ it, how to bring intelligence in. You're not going to see American technicians or American soldiers in Ukraine. They will probably likely continue the mission that they've been continuing somewhere in NATO terrain. Okay, so it is accurate that they will, something along that line will occur, but it's going to be operated by Ukrainians. And let's remember that Ukraine has a very good knack of taking a weapon system provided to them for a specific purpose and developing other purposes and other techniques and employing that weapon in a sense that has not been considered by the country that provided it. So the innovation of Ukrainian engineering and know-how is what I look forward to seeing on the battlefield. And they can, and they have demonstrated also at the F-16 that they can bring these systems into their arsenal and use them effectively.
Also this week in Brussels happening another important meeting. The Ukrainian Defense Contact Group are gathering, known as a Rammstein format. Mark, what's likely to be on the agenda? And should Kyiv expect any other additional support from its allies?
Yeah, Sofia, we hope, right? This is the 31st meeting of the contact group to go over Ukraine's defense needs. And I think high on that list is going to be the Tomahawks, the Taurus, the deep strike capabilities that Ukraine badly needs. I think missile defense is also going to be on there, air defense, in terms of protecting against Russian drones and the like. And I think that hopefully that deepens when these defense ministers gather, that it's just not about aerial defense, but it's about coordination. What can NATO be doing more in terms of interdicting these missiles, not just before they hit Romanian or Estonian or Polish airspace, but potentially interdicting them over Western Ukraine as well. And I would add a third agenda, based on what John and I have long argued for. I hope that finally NATO gets serious about looking into a defense shield, which many European countries support for Eastern Ukraine, Western Ukraine, I apologize. I think that's needed. As we said above in this segment, we really need game changers on the board right now. Putin has to be pressured, cornered, and increasingly isolated in terms of where he can bring his war to in Ukraine and against Europe. And I think those are effective ways of doing it. So hopefully this is just not another meeting to coordinate existing supply lines, but new thinking that's going to coordinate getting them to Tomahawk, getting them the Taurus, and then air defense systems. And then I hope that as I mentioned, that this really comes down to some kind of shield for Western airspace in Ukraine.
Israel and Hamas have agreed on a ceasefire deal and hostage release agreement. Mark, don't you think that this could be another blow to Vladimir Putin, because that is a personal success of President Trump and US leadership around the globe?
Yeah, Daniel, it is a blow because, as John and I have argued in a piece that we did for The Hill called Putin's Fingerprints All Over October 7th, it's very clear that Putin wanted to see Hamas as a distraction for the U.S., especially U.S. weapons and munitions and assets in the Mideast. He did that several days. I mean, October 7th happened several days before a key counter-Russian offensive in Avdiivka that proved somewhat successful from the Russian standpoint. And so the fact that, as John mentioned earlier in this segment, that it's now suddenly the Mideast is more off the table. Iran is in trouble. Hamas is hopefully on the way out. Putin has got to take that as a blow. It strengthened Trump's hand. Now, will Putin show that he cares about that? No. Obviously, we're going to hear more of the same. I suspect you'll hear more nuclear rhetoric, which we're already getting hints of. But definitely, Trump's in the driver's seat right now. And the question is, where does he take the bus from here? And as we've mentioned, he can do that with all the above, the Western shield in Ukraine. Not meaning to repeat myself, but to just drive that point home, getting them the Tomahawks, getting them the Taurus, thinking out of the box, interdicting that shadow fleet that's funding the war. And most importantly, from a domestic standpoint, what Trump can be doing is telling the Senate to go ahead and pass the sanctions bill, the secondary sanctions bill against Russia, and start to choke off their funding globally. Those are needed. Trump needs to be doing all of the above. So hopefully, that's what comes out of this victory over Hamas, or at least this temporary victory. Hamas still has to be gotten out of it, but that's what I think is the best way forward for Trump and his team.
Do you feel that this deal on the Middle East has changed the balance of power around the globe in the matter of US leadership and Russia's so-called leadership? Because it's interesting, Vladimir Putin was not there during this big summit in Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh. However, I'm confident that he would be happy, he would like to be there and to be presented as another mediator. However, he didn't participate in this, one of the biggest effort to bring peace to the region.
Yeah, Daniel, that's a great question. And I think it goes beyond just the dynamics between Putin and Trump. It also plays into China and the role. Because at this meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh, there was a side discussion between Trump and the head of Indonesia, which is very close to certain reports of signing on to the Abraham Accords in the Mideast. And that would be huge because Indonesia is the largest Muslim country in the world. And that could be very dynamic in terms of changing that. But also, obviously, Indonesia is in the Indo-Pacific, and that affects China as well. So I think as we look at these balances of power, we can't get too focused on just Europe and Russia in the U.S., but we also have to remember that China is out there as well. So certainly Trump's hand is strengthening. And I think China has got the messaging themselves that, look, Trump was willing to do this in the Mideast in terms of changing these dynamics. He may very well try to do the same thing in Russia, against Russia in Eastern Europe. And China now has to be wondering how does that affect them with their plans with respect to Taiwan. So definitely lots of movements there. Now, I don't think China's coward by any of this. I think that, if anything, we may see them deciding that they need to support Russia more. As John likes to say, look, you look for actions and reactions to it. And I think it's just a little bit premature to say that Trump's hand overall is strengthened, but certainly he's got momentum. And now the question is, how does China react to that? And how do they react to that directly and indirectly through Russia? Time will tell.
Thank you, Mark and John, for your time and really insightful answers, and glory to Ukraine.
Hey, thanks for having us back on the show. Look forward to more discussion next week.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Sofia.